Brazil's recent military adjustments along its northern frontier have attracted growing attention, not because of dramatic troop movements or confrontational rhetoric, but precisely because of their restrained and deliberate nature. In a regional environment marked by political uncertainty in Venezuela, cross-border criminal activity, and persistent humanitarian pressures, Brazil has chosen a path that emphasizes deterrence through presence rather than escalation through force. This approach reflects a deeper strategic logic rooted in Brazil's historical preference for stability, autonomy, and regional balance. The timing of this repositioning is not accidental. Over the past year, northern South America has experienced renewed volatility, driven by Venezuela's internal political struggles and their spillover effects. Migration flows, illicit trafficking, and the potential for localized instability near the border present risks that cannot be ignored by a country with Brazil's geographic scale and responsibilities. Yet Brazil has avoided framing these risks in alarmist terms. Instead, the government and the armed forces have treated them as long-term structural challenges that require sustained monitoring and preparedness rather than short-term crisis responses. Geography plays a decisive role in shaping this posture. The Amazon region, often discussed internationally as an environmental concern, is equally a strategic space. Vast distances, limited infrastructure, and low population density complicate surveillance and rapid response. For Brazilian military planners, the northern frontier is not a secondary theater, but a sensitive axis where sovereignty must be exercised quietly and consistently. Control of space, rather than confrontation with any specific adversary, remains the guiding principle. In this context, the term repositioning should be understood carefully. Brazil is not massing forces at the border or signaling offensive intent. Instead, it is adjusting operational patterns, increasing readiness, and improving situational awareness. Air operations have been adapted to provide better coverage of remote areas, while ground forces focus on mobility and logistics rather than permanent forward deployment. This reflects a doctrine of deterrence by presence, where capability and readiness are visible enough to discourage destabilizing actions, but measured enough to avoid provocation. The Brazilian Air Force plays a central role in this quiet form of deterrence. Air power offers flexibility, speed, and reversibility, qualities that are essential for managing uncertainty without escalating tensions. The integration of modern platforms, such as the Gripen-E, into routine training and surveillance missions reinforces Brazil's ability to monitor its airspace and respond if necessary. At the same time, these activities are framed as defensive and preventive, aligned with Brazil's constitutional commitment to peace and regional cooperation. On the ground, the Brazilian Army's role is equally nuanced. Border security operations emphasize mobility, intelligence gathering, and coordination with civilian authorities rather than heavy militarization. The use of armored and support vehicles is oriented toward patrol, transport, and deterrence, not toward projecting force into neighboring territory. This distinction matters greatly for domestic audiences, who remain sensitive to the militarization of internal security following past experiences. By clearly separating military border defense from law enforcement functions, the armed forces help preserve public trust. Strategic restraint is a defining feature of Brazil's approach. Unlike major powers that rely on visible shows of force to signal resolve, Brazil has traditionally favored consistency and predictability. This does not imply weakness. On the contrary, restraint can enhance credibility by demonstrating confidence and control. For neighboring countries, Brazil's posture communicates readiness without hostility. For extra-regional actors, it reinforces Brazil's image as a responsible stakeholder rather than an unpredictable actor. Public perception within Brazil is a critical factor shaping this strategy. After years of intense political polarization, Brazilian society has little appetite for external conflict or military adventurism. Polls and public discourse suggest broad support for protecting borders and combating transnational crime, coupled with skepticism toward any policy that risks entanglement in regional wars. The current approach aligns well with these sentiments. It allows the armed forces to fulfill their mission while remaining above partisan politics and ideological disputes. This balance also strengthens Brazil's regional role. As the largest country in South America, Brazil is often viewed as a natural anchor for stability. Exercising that role does not require dominance or coercion. Instead, it depends on predictability, dialogue, and the capacity to absorb shocks without destabilizing neighbors. By avoiding dramatic gestures and maintaining open channels of communication, Brazil reinforces its position as a stabilizing power rather than a hegemon. Looking ahead to the period between 2030 and 2035, the importance of the northern frontier is likely to grow rather than diminish. Climate change, demographic pressures, and evolving patterns of organized crime will continue to shape the security environment. Brazil's current posture can be seen as preparation for this future. Investments in surveillance, mobility, and indigenous defense industry capabilities contribute to long-term resilience. They allow Brazil to adapt gradually, without sudden shifts that could alarm either domestic or international audiences. This long-term perspective is closely tied to Brazil's broader vision of strategic autonomy. By relying on a mix of domestic capabilities and carefully chosen partnerships, Brazil seeks to avoid dependence on any single external power. The emphasis on controlled modernization rather than rapid expansion reflects budgetary realities and societal priorities. It also underscores a belief that credibility comes from sustained capability, not from short-term demonstrations of strength. Ultimately, Brazil's quiet military repositioning near Venezuela illustrates a distinctive model of deterrence. It is a model built on patience, geographic awareness, and respect for political context. Strength is present, but it is not advertised. Signals are sent, but they are subtle. In a region where miscalculation can have lasting consequences, this approach offers a compelling example of how a rising middle power can safeguard its interests without undermining stability. For observers inside and outside Brazil, the key lesson is that security does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes the most effective strategies are those that operate just below the threshold of attention, shaping behavior through consistency rather than confrontation. Brazil's northern posture today reflects this philosophy, and it will likely remain a defining feature of the country's defense strategy in the years to come.